Hi everyone, this is Fishbone from Delvehammer. I just want to take a look at what we call standard strategy. There's been a lot of questions coming back to us on how do we define standard strategy, how do we run through it, and just wanted to spend a little bit of time explaining it. So, standard strategy, the reason we invented such a thing, and it's really not on us, this is a very traditional uh, uh, MMO kind of idea, but standard strategy is in place to allow us first to divide labor up. We don't want everyone trying to DPS, or we don't want everyone trying to heal. We want each person to know their role so that they can focus on the role, so that the boss in the dungeon doesn't pull us away from that. It also allows us to maximize efficiencies. We can focus on how to be the best healer or the best DPS, and instead of having to spread all of our skill points, all of our attributes, the slots in our bar to cover multiple things. It allows us to be very focused in each one of our roles. That also allows us to communicate better. If we know that an enemy is slipping by, we know that the tank is supposed to take care of that, so you know who to scream at when you need help. Instead of saying, someone help me out, it's very clear who's supposed to help. And then building our tunes, building our characters for dungeon runs is much simpler when you know what your role is. You only focus on the things that are going to help you perform your role instead of all of the diverse things you would need to do inside of a soloing build. So our crew composition at Delvehammer is pretty traditional. It's a tank, a healer, a ranged DPS, and a melee DPS. So the tank's job, first and foremost, is to take the punches. Um, you want at least 85-90% of the damage that's being thrown at the crew hitting the tank. So obviously when you're building the tank out, the first thing you're going to want to focus on is health. He's going to have a ton of health so that he can absorb that damage. The tank is going to also have the ability to resist damage. So when you're looking at gear, that's heavy armor. If you're running a tank at light armor, you're not helping your crew out. A tank really does need to have a very high health, have a very high physical resistance, very high spell resistance. Those are the three things that a tank must do. You cannot skip those things because, again, there's going to be too much damage. And as in a crew, when the tank goes down, what ends up happening is that damage that would normally come to the tank starts hitting the healer and the ranged DPS or the squishier characters, so you wipe pretty quickly. When you see a tank go down in a battle, the chances of a wipe are the most high for a single character death. So something else that I see skipped inside of ESO for the tank is the tank has to aggro the enemies. Just because you hit them, they will not come after you. They'll go after the squishies. There's AI inside of the enemies in the game, the enemy NPCs, to chase right after the squishiest members. If you run a dungeon, it's not going to take you very long to realize you need to kill the healers first. Well, the game characters know that as well, so the tank needs to make the enemies mad at the tank, so they're attacking the tank and not attacking the healer or the sorcerer. And so to do that, there's only two mechanisms in the game that do a taunt. And so a taunt is where we hit the enemy. The enemy becomes enraged or aggroed at the tank and starts chasing the tank, forgets about the healer. And so there are two skill lines that do that, at least that I'm aware of. One is in the sword and board, the shield and weapon skill line is the first one, ransack or pierce. So those are the skill that the tank will hit more than anything else. The other optional one is in the Undaunted line, Inner Fire, which is the third skill in that tree, does a ranged taunt. Frankly, I just like I like the melee taunt better. It takes less time to do, and has some good side benefits as well. So when a tank runs into a battle, he is going to take his taunt. He's going to hit all of the enemies as he's walking past them. The group is going to fall back and give the tank enough time to aggravate everyone all of the enemies, group them into a tight group. If there's a boss, he'll aggro the boss as well, and try to keep all the ads grouped around the boss. He's also going to move that group, that mob, away from the squishies, those that the other members of the party that provide support in the background, the healers, the sorcerers, those guys that can't take a ton of damage. Their job is to heal damage or lay it down. And so, you're keeping the mob away. You got to keep the mob away from the squishies, from the back line. And then blocking heavy attacks. So you just don't want to stand there and take the punches. You want to do something strategic here. So if you see a heavy attack coming, you block the attack, you exploit the attack. It takes an enemy out of the picture. So that's, just learning how to deal with the damage is the job of the tank. Doesn't mean you stand in every AoE. There are going to be times when you roll out of AoEs, area of effect damage from a boss especially. But if you do that, you want to stay cognizant of the fourth priority, which is keeping the enemies away from the squishies. Right? You don't want to pull everybody as you're trying to get out of damage back to this back line. And since you're taking the most amount of damage, it's a good idea for the tank to have the ability to self-heal and help the healer out in keeping himself alive, because when the tank wipes or when the tank dies, the crew is going to wipe almost every time. And so keep that in mind. The tank should be able to help with his own heals. And you notice I didn't list DPS in this. It's good to have some DPS, but that is so far away from what you need to be focused on. These are the things you do. You take the damage, you taunt the enemies, and you have to keep them taunted. If you look at the duration, it's only about 15 seconds on either one of the taunts. So you go through, you group them, you taunt them, and those that are still left after a handful of seconds, you got to taunt them again and keep them all grouped. So that's the role of the tank. The role of the healer is pretty straightforward, and it takes a special kind of person to be a healer. You have to keep the party alive, which means you're staring at the upper left-hand corner of the game at health bars almost every dungeon. I've run as a healer through nearly every dungeon in ESO, and for me it can get pretty boring. You're staring really at a quarter of the screen, you're laying down the heals, and there's not too much more for you to do, right? As you're laying down the heals, you're also going to do some kind of regenerational magicka, either through Restless Staff or dual wielding. Also, beyond that, buffs and cleanses. If you have some way to make your guys stronger or or debuff to make the enemies weaker, you lay that down when you have a reserve of magicka that can do that. And then in certain times in strategy, you can pivot. We all have full health. We need to burn a boss quickly. You pivot to laying down some damage through area of effect or damage over time to start weeding out the mobs or killing down the boss. But again, the main part of being a healer is heals. And so many healers get bored of healing in a dungeon that they start doing DPS and then they miss it and they miss the heal. The tank dies, the tank dies, and then a cascade effect happens that leads to a wipe. The healer's job is very important in keeping everyone alive, but it's at least 85% of just dishing out heals there. So next is range DPS, and this is our main mob killer. So what the range DPS is going to do is once the tank has the ads grouped into a tight group, he's going to lay down damage over time, area of effect damage, and start wiping that mob out. And so the tank's going to try to keep that group close to the boss. The range DPS has to remember he's the one that throws heavy punches, but he cannot take one. It's the tank's job to take the damage. So he needs to stay out of the damage area. He needs to stay out of the AoEs from the enemies. He needs to stay away from the melee attackers. If something is attacking him, he needs to scream at the tank to come aggro the ad or the attacker and pull that attacker back back to the mob, or potentially the melee DPS. The main thing is stay away from the damage, stay away from the fight, and just lay down area effect, ranged hits. In the case that the healer or the tank go down, it may be on the ranged DPS to pick them up. So if the healer goes down, someone has to take over backup heals. It may be the tank, because the tank has some healing self-heal, so he may just have to keep everybody alive and tank. It may be if the ranged DPS has backup heals, then it would be the melee DPS that would pick up the healer. But keep in mind that in any scenario, the player should know who's picking who up when they die, and then they quickly do that. And of course, if someone does go down, going back to the tank's job is to take that mob, pull it away from the dead body, so that the crew member that is picking up the body has room to do that without being disrupted or killed himself. The melee DPS is really the free safety of this team. His primary responsibility is to take care of the ranged support enemies. And so as the tank groups everybody in a tight mob, the ranged, even if he aggroes the ranged attackers, they're still going to shoot the tank from a distance, which means they're going to be outside of AoE dropped by the ranged DPS. So the melee DPS is to go around the perimeter and kill all those things that won't be grouped. And the first thing that he's going to want to kill are the healers, so that the battle doesn't drag on. If the healer's just healing things as the enemy healer is healing as the ranged DPS is laying down damage, the battle will never end, and it won't end well for our crew. The next one to take down would be summoners, because what summoners are doing are adding more adds into the more enemies into the mix. So the melee DPS is going to take those guys down, and they tend to work from a range perspective. Then take down the mages, because the mages are going to lay down DPS. We want to reduce the amount of damage they can do, and then really pick off the ranged attackers after that. So that's really the primary duty of the melee, is go around and clean up all of that, and then when all of that's cleaned up, he comes back into the mob and helps everyone else clear out the mob and the boss. If an enemy makes it past the tank, or the taunt expires and the enemy aggroes on the healer or the ranged DPS, and the tank is stuck and can't take the aggro, can't pull them, or the mob around him is too big to start pulling back to do that, the melee DPS will go and kill that enemy that got back to the squishies. He's also going to pick up the ranged DPS if he dies, so the tank will continue tanking, will move the mob away from the body. The healer will continue healing, keeping everybody alive on the resurrection, and the melee DPS will pick up the ranged DPS. And if the tank dies, it becomes melee's job to tank and then pull the mob away, and then normally the ranged DPS is going to pick up the tank. So those are the roles of what we do. It's just it's us getting into a role. It's us knowing what we do in a given situation, practicing this out, and through that we're able to communicate better together. We're able to work better. We're able to roll through dungeons in a very effective manner, just playing our roles. So anyway, this has been Fishbone with Delve Hammer. I hope this is helpful. Be sure to hit us up on our YouTube channel and our live Twitch feeds.